started. My name is Vicki Gooch. I'm a detective with the Idaho State Police. I'm a graduate of this program here in 1985 in the Criminal Justice Department. And then I migrated north and got my master's out of the University of Idaho in '94. I see that some of you are students I've had. How many of you are current students in a program here at VSU? How many of you are practitioners in the criminal justice system right now in the field? How many of you are wanting to be practitioners in the field? A minority, okay. I am going to co-teach today with Robert Karanen, who is in the back. He's with the Ada County Coroner's Office. He's the forensic anthropologist, but by fall should be our county coroner. Okay, if everything goes well for us. Today we're going to talk about the topic of homicide and traumatic death. I came here 6 years ago, gave a presentation to a group just like you, and the feedback we got was we used a lot of graphics, and it was too graphic for the attendees. So we had pretty much taken out the pictures. I know, it's a little disappointing. But we'll spend more time talking about trends in homicide and traumatic death that are going on. I'll cover what's going on nationally. Robert will focus in on what's going on within the state of Idaho. And if you have any questions, we want interaction. That's a better presentation than just me standing up here for an hour, Robert standing for an hour and getting no feedback. Okay, it doesn't really work well. Okay, you'll get information. What you do with it is up to you. Some of you are master's students in the CJ program, correct? So if you need additional research information after we're done, we'll give you contact information. You can reach out to us individually. So in 2011, sorry, the clicker's not working. In 2011, we saw a decline, believe it or not, for the first time since the 80s, well, since '63, in homicide rates in the United States. So we saw that approximately 14,610 people were victims of homicide. We'll break down victimology here in a little bit. And this is data compiled by the FBI. So we have two forms that we get our information from, including within the state police. The FBI gathers statistics from something called the National Crime Victim Survey, which we'll talk about here shortly. And then they take police reports that are entered into computer bases and they glean their information from computer statistics. And we've evolved even from the top, or the information I'm going to give you today, we've taken one step even further on NIBRS and IBRS submissions. Okay, so there were 14,610 people in 2011 that were victims of homicide that were reported by state and local law enforcement, okay? I want to clarify here, when it's reported as a homicide, everything including suicide, accidental death, unattended death is treated as a homicide from a detective's perspective until you can rule out all other things. So when we get a call that says there's been a death, go investigate it. You treat every scene as if it were a homicide scene until you can determine it's anything less than that. Why do we do that, do you think? You criminal justice students know why, because we talked about it. Why would we do that? What's significant about a homicide scene that you only get one opportunity possibly to gather or glean information from? Evidence. So if you don't take care of it at the time that you're dispatched or called to the scene, you lose the potential of collecting evidence that might help you understand later on what happened to your victim or your victims in the plural. Okay, in 2011, our homicide rates were 4.7 homicides per 100,000. Prior to that time, our numbers were higher. I don't have the numbers up here, but what was happening? How many of you were born in 1980 or after? How many before 1980? So those that were born before 1980, what epidemic did we have in America that we really revisited the war on drugs over? What was going on in the United States that we saw an increase in our homicide rates as a result? The crack cocaine epidemic, right? The crack cocaine epidemic was the driving force behind our homicide rates. And then the war on drugs, we revisited it from the early 60s when Nixon implemented it, and Nancy Reagan came on board and said we've got to get back on task on battling this issue of drug dependency. What in the 60s brought drugs to America? History. What in the 60s? Vietnam, very good. The Vietnam War, we sent young men over to Vietnam, and those that returned came back with some addiction. And with them, they brought back drugs we had never seen on U.S. soil before. So in the 60s, early in the 60s, Nixon thought we should do something about the problem then. When it was reported back to the White House, we're seeing something we've never seen on U.S. soil as far as social behavior associated with drug use or drug abuse. In the 80s, it was a crack cocaine epidemic. Today, what is our biggest drug in Idaho? Let's focus on Idaho. meth and marijuana, correct? Meth. Now meth, I will tell you, when I first came here 16 years ago, we were doing 5 meth labs a week. Today, we don't even do 5 meth labs a year. There was one significant change in the law that really helped our battle, because there's a lot of violence associated with meth that resulted in homicide. We put the pseudoephedrine, which is an ingredient used to manufacture meth, in the control of the pharmacist. So before you could walk into any drugstore and purchase as many, if you wanted to, cold capsules that you needed to manufacture meth, and nobody questioned it. We've gone into houses where there were hundreds of cold capsules purchased in one outing. So nobody questioned why you're taking 100 cold capsules home, and really it was being used to manufacture meth. How many of you recently have tried to buy cold capsules? What do you have to give when you do it? And you get one packet, right? So they're really controlling it. We've seen a decline. With meth in Idaho, when I came here 16 years ago, we had an increase in homicide. We've seen a decrease as a result of it, because meth is a drug that leads to violent tendencies or behaviors, okay? So the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is run by the FBI, gathers data and it reports. And it reports per state and then nationwide what is going on in our trends. We are seeing a decrease in homicide, but where are we seeing an increase, do you think? Anyone in here been a victim recently of any type of crime? Property. How about ID theft? It's financial. So we've gone away from violent crime to more of a financial crime. So that's proliferating in America right now. That's one of the biggest battles we're battling. Okay, I want you to know that the majority of homicides, we're not going to follow this verbatim, the majority of homicides aren't committed by strangers, right? Who are they committed by?
Friends, family,
people that profess their love, right? And then one day love you and the next day don't. Okay, are we seeing those numbers? Yes, we see those numbers more so than the stranger abduction that results in a homicide. Okay, those numbers are very small, even though what do they do? Who emphasizes those crimes?
media.
The media pushes it, and it makes us scared, right? So we don't see the numbers in Idaho, especially, of random crimes being perpetrated, homicides, by strangers. Most of the victims we deal with is somebody significant to them that's taken their lives, including children, okay? Children, abduction, and homicides is rare. It's usually a custodial issue, and sometimes it doesn't have a good ending. We do have those cases. How many of you were in Boise in the Valley 6 years ago with Robert and Emma? So did any of you doubt that it was going to be their parents? No, you didn't doubt it was going to be their parents because they told a story and then they couldn't stick with the story because it was a lie. We have to define homicide, okay? Includes murder and non-negligent, okay? Non-negligent manslaughter, which we're going to talk about why there's a difference here, is the willful killing of one human being by another. Okay, this is a definition most state statutes have adopted, including Idaho statutes. Okay, how many of you have or know of somebody that has been involved in a DUI accident where there's been injury or death? So what did they get charged with, if you don't mind sharing? What, if they resulted in a death, what were the charges in the end?
It wasn't a death, but she rear-ended a cop car, and she got a felony DUI. I don't know, I mean, I just know that she spent time in jail, and she spent lots of time on probation.
Were there injuries?
To the cop, yes.
Okay, so this isn't a DUI class, I'm just telling you, we see motor vehicle accidents that result in death. You have to show intent. A mitigating circumstance would be that you're under the influence of alcohol, right? So you may lack the criminal intent to kill someone. So there's a different statute that applies if you kill someone. It's called manslaughter, okay? It's a lesser included crime to homicide, like heat of passion crimes where you're arguing with your spouse and your spouse pulls out a gun and shoots you. If the argument precipitates the murder, it's not first degree murder. There was no intent, where there was no malice aforethought and wasn't premeditated. They didn't lie in wait waiting for you to come home from work and then ambush you and kill you. In a heat of passion situation where you're arguing and somebody pulls a gun and kills the other, we call that second degree murder. It has a lesser penalty than first degree murder where it's premeditated with malice aforethought. So we're focusing on homicide and murder, specifically first degree murder right now, okay? Do people kill each other all the time in the United States over domestic violence? Yes, they do, right? You're going to find that the numbers that the FBI draws does not include how they're adjudicated in the end by a prosecutor or a judge. Tell me why.
pleaded down.
How many of you have ever seen a case where it starts out and it looks like a solid case, and by the time you see what are convicted of or plead to, it doesn't resemble the initial charges, right? So I do sex crimes cases too, and I've gone to county jails where jailers are having inappropriate sexual contact with inmates, and then I see burglary later. Why would a prosecutor's office allow a police officer to plead to burglary instead of the sex offense that it was? And what else is important about sex crimes? Very good. So what they're doing is they're circumventing the system. I don't agree with it. They're letting the police officer circumvent the requirement for registering for the rest of your life as a sex offender. Okay? I don't agree with it, but does it happen? Yes, I've seen it. So in homicide, it starts out looking like a first-degree murder, and sometimes we end up with voluntary or involuntary manslaughter. I've been on those cases, those homicide cases, and they don't even resemble what we started with the intent and malice of forethought and premeditation, and all of a sudden we're letting them plead to involuntary manslaughter, which gets them 5 years in prison. Okay, why did we do that as a system?
Speed it up. Just hurry up the case, move it through, get it done, and on to the next one.
There's a bigger, more compelling reason. So there's a bigger, more compelling reason. Cost. Who said cost? A first-degree murder case, typically for defense, is $800,000. How many of you are born and raised in Idaho? What counties do you think can afford $800,000 for just defense alone? No, not very many, right? So if it's a first-degree murder case and we're going to prosecute them on first-degree murder, you have to have qualified, specialized prosecutors to defend the defendant, okay, the accused. That costs money. That's extra training for the attorney who's going to represent the defendant. If you're seeking the death penalty, there's a lot more loopholes you have to cross through or pass through in order to get that outcome. So you may start with a first-degree murder case where it's a justified, not justified meaning the action, but charging offense, first-degree murder, and it's whittled down to something that doesn't even resemble what you started with. Okay, that's our reality as police officers. We see it all the time. Robert's going to talk about what he sees in Idaho, the trends. It won't scare you to live here. It will make you thankful you live here than in other states. Okay, so this is important. You guys should know this. That the homicide rates have been cut to nearly half, 50%, starting in 2011. Now, that's the most recent data we have. The Bureau of Justice Statistics is typically a year behind, but the research that's conducted is sometimes 3 to 5 years behind. So I get my stats from, we have a Bureau of Criminal Identification, BCI, for the state police. I get all my information I use for my research, but also for writing papers. And this is good for those of you that are doing this. At this table I saw, there is access you have to information in Idaho that takes the Idaho trends and compares it to the national trends that you don't have to pay to receive. We can send it to you electronically. You can incorporate it into papers. We're seeing that the homicide rate in the United States has been cut by 50%. What are the two reasons I told you? Well, I've told you one reason. What's the second reason behind the crack cocaine epidemic? None of you, some of you weren't born before 1980, right? Those people committing violent crimes in the 80s associated with the crack cocaine epidemic and distribution and sales, right? Where are they now? Or dead, right? That's an aging population. That's a very violent lifestyle. Those people don't live to see 100 and have birthdays celebrated for their 100th year. Do you know what I'm saying? They live in an environment and their lifestyle, they're not here for long duration. So a lot of them have died. Some of them are incarcerated, or it's suggested by research that when males get older, that they lose that violent tendencies with the aging process. So some of it is they stop being violent, because the older they got, the less violent they were. So we saw the decline from that. What happened with our war on drugs? What has happened with our war on drugs? Any of you have classes that talk about the war on drugs? Where has it shifted to? Who said that? Where has it shifted to?
Mostly focusing in Mexico.
Very good. Because so before, when I came here 16 years ago, you could get your meth manufactured here from somebody's kitchen or bathroom. And now where do we have to get it? The majority of it, where is it coming from? Because they're businessmen and they realize the shift. Well, the minute we said we're going to take pseudoephedrine and remove it from the counters and put it behind the control of the pharmacist, the Mexicans aren't dumb. They're businessmen, right? Are they abusers? Maybe some of them are, but most of them aren't, right? They're running a business for profit. They realized the trend was we're losing our ability to manufacture methamphetamine here in the United States within our houses, and now we're seeing a lot of methamphetamine coming up from Mexico. One other thing they did, heroin used to be a drug that you would inject in your veins. Heroin's a very violent drug too. It doesn't have a good outcome. Okay? Addiction is immediate and life expectancy is short. Made a snortable form of heroin. They saw the trends. They're smart people, right? Same thing with marijuana. Saw the trends. You know, we take down marijuana grows every year in the summer, right? Throughout Idaho, in these remote locations. Who do you think the primary suspects are behind the marijuana grows? Mexican cartels. Okay? I know we're not here to talk about drugs, but there's a trend that goes hand in hand with drug abuse and some violent tendencies, correct? Homicidal tendencies too. So where is our target age range? And Robert's going to reiterate this later. You see the 18 to 24 years of age is where we lose a lot of people, young people, in suicides as well, not just in homicides. Now in Idaho, we don't have this as much of an impact. I'm sorry, I like to walk around, so I'll try not to. As much of an impact, they're gonna tell you African American males are the #1 victim in the United States, but in Idaho, who do you think it is? Who? How about in our pockets where we do have violent crime, it's going to be your Hispanic males. So Nampa and Caldwell, how many of you follow the news? Nampa and Caldwell, they won't report this in the news, but I know for a fact, in 1 year alone, had hundreds of drive-by shootings. They're not gonna report it because none of you would wanna live in Caldwell, and if you do, you'd want out, right? Caldwell had, on average, hundreds of shootings a year, gang-related. They did something in response to it, proactively. They formed an impact team, sent law enforcement officers over there, and started cleaning house. If you're a convicted felon in any state, and including Idaho, and you possess a gun, you go back to prison. So in essence, they did a house cleaning. I just heard recently Caldwell now has seen for the first time in about 20 years a reduction in their crime, okay? So the crimes sometimes were homicides, right? We had gang-related homicides from that activity. They did an impact, they did an assessment, formed an impact team. What would we call that for those criminal justice majors? What type of policing is that called? Problem-oriented, right? They identified the problem and responded to it and took care of business, and now we're seeing a decrease in gang activity. Where has it pushed? Anyone here from the Magic Valley? Where has it pushed to? Twin Falls and that area now. So unfortunately what happens is when you put a major push in enforcement efforts in one area and it becomes common knowledge to the criminals, it pushes them out to other areas. I've been a cop long enough, I can tell you, this doesn't happen today, but when I was a rookie cop, when we had a problem citizen in Boise, Idaho, we put them on a Greyhound bus at the bus station and shipped them to Salt Lake, one-way ticket. Guess what Salt Lake did? Sent this, not the same people, but their problem children to us. It was a vicious cycle, okay? It sounds like we convicted them. It was a repeated status offenses, not anything major, urinating in public, public nuisance, panhandling. We'd load them on a bus, ship them down to Salt Lake, and all of a sudden we notice these new people coming into Boise, and we ask them their origins, and they say, we're coming from Salt Lake, the Salt Lake Police Department, compliments of the Salt Lake Police Department. So it's not really effective, is it? You shouldn't really incarcerate sometimes status offenses, because a lot of it is tied to homelessness, which that's not our topic. You're gonna see, nationally speaking, black males represent the largest homicide victim population, okay? Who's the least likely in America to be victimized with regards to homicide? Who? No, not Asians. How about white elderly females who stay at home and play cards with their white elderly female counterparts? They are least likely to be victimized because they associate or socialize in a circle of people that are known to them that they probably have grown over, correct? And are participating in activity in a safe, confined environment. Where do we run the most risk? We're going to see here in a minute where homicides occur. They occur in homes, but where else do they occur?
College campuses.
Well, I hope not, but yes, we do see that, right? We'll talk about mass shootings later at the end of the presentation. Where else do we see it happen?
Inner cities?
And inner cities is where predominantly they come from, and then you're mixing sometimes drugs and alcohol, right? So white elderly females, maybe they'll have a hot toddy before bed, but you're not going to see a significant amount of substance abuse occurring within that population, right? So least likely victimized are white elderly females. Use of a firearm. Why have we seen a reduction in firearm use, do you think?
Restrictions on weapons.
Very good. And how many of you in here I wanna just ask by hand, think we should have guns on the campus? Good, because I was afraid if I gave a B or a C, I might be victimized, but no. How many of you think that we needed that? That law needed to be passed tonight? See, I think the majority of you feel it's different, right? So you're gonna come to class maybe by fall, and you're gonna see armed students. Yeah, I have a different opinion about it because I'm a cop. It's gonna be hard for me in a shooting to discern between the good guy and the bad guy now, right? Because some of the good guys are gonna be armed.